Chuck. How are you?
Good to meet you.
You too, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this film because I grew up watching these action movies on a Saturday night, in the late 90s, and I'd love to know what it is about this era of filmmaking that you think, still resonates with people and why obviously they're demanding this film on 4K on its anniversary.
I'm delighted at the interest and, as you say, the demand for this film. They did an incredible job. I worked with them at Warner's on recolorizing it and doing a great new mix in Dolby Atmos. So I had fun. It's better than ever, I'm glad to say. But you're asking about the era. Um, this was when we still did, our first position was everything physical. So there wasn't the options we have today. We might not even go to a location anymore, at this point. But those scenes were staged to be as safe as they could be, but they were dangerous by nature. And I think the audience senses that my cast, the filmmakers, even our stunt team, there is a sense of danger around Eraser Sing It Again, especially the parachute scene where we had individuals really falling, including Arnold, who did a repelling rig gag. So he was falling straight at camera from the highest stage in Warner's, and it was something you don't have actors do, but Arnold was capable. Um, so I think our hearts were in it. It's a great story with great characters. I think there's some traditional heroics that the audiences miss these days, where our films are so much more cynical. But I was ahead of my time on casting Vanessa Williams, just as a smart, strong woman. I wanted a cast that upped Arnold's game in performance. So with Jimmy Caan and Vanessa and James Coburn, his brand is intact, but his performance is better than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Arnold there because I know you've worked with some amazing leading men, obviously Jim Carrey, you've got Dwayne The Rock Johnson, but what was your experience like collaborating with Arnold at that point in his career and obviously helping to tell this story in Eraser?
I I love Arnold. He is a man's man, which I appreciate. Arnold kind of came from nothing, which I relate to. I didn't come from nothing, but I didn't have film school and I didn't know anybody in Hollywood, and I came out and got a job sweeping stages, so I related to that. He came as this Austrian bodybuilder with an accent people were making fun of, who said who basically bragged early on in his career that he was going to be a star. So I admire that. I mean, he's really something, and he's bold enough to help me design stunt sequences where there is going to be some physical strain on him, and he knows it. And he was ready to do, I think, a little more in performance than he had done in the past. And I was challenged because I love True Lies. So I said, if I'm doing my Arnold movie 2 years after True Lies, it better rock. And what are the scenes I can do I've never seen in an action film before?
Yeah, for sure. And of course, something Arnold's at the center of that amazing final shootout sequence with the railgun. I'm sure I'm not the only one to ask you about that, but what do you remember about shooting that sequence? And were there any moments in particular you were particularly proud to be able to pull off, given, as you said, the VFX limitations at the time?
Well, the honestly, most of the movie. I mean, I tend to write myself. I've done the same thing on The Mask, and it worked. I tend to write things I don't know exactly how to do when we write them. Then the fun is breaking it down and using our stagecraft and our VFX craft to figure out how to do it, reasonably safely. There's a, I mean, there's certain shots that were harder, that weren't necessarily the most spectacular shots. There's a moment when Arnold bursts up out of the floorboards where the set wasn't quite as breakaway as it should be, but then you've got Arnold able to do it. So that ended up selling really well. There were moments that were more difficult than others, but to be perfectly honest, it was a great, amazing cast. They all brought their own chemistry to an Arnold movie, especially Jimmy Caan, who's another kind of unexpected vibe in this kind of action film. From The Thief and Godfather, I just thought this I got to get this performer to work with Arnold. So there are things like that where maybe they were tough in the getting, but there was so much fun in the shooting that I don't complain about that movie. The
Yeah, for sure. And
the parachute scene was the most difficult because of all the elements involved.
yeah, but could you talk us through that parachute sequence? I know you said it was on the Warner Brothers lot, and obviously Arnold was doing it for real. But how was it to choreograph that and to have it come across as convincingly as it does in the film?
It was a real exercise, and this is almost like if I ever teach a film class, that's storyboards for that sequence. We shot exactly the storyboards because these are all different techniques from full-scale live action to tricks like Arnold rappelling down from the top of a stage to an amazing real parachuting team, world-class parachutist Guy Manos and Jeff Jones were rigging that sequence and were really doing the falls. And don't forget the cameraman. People forget the cameraman who's dropping with the parachutist and has to keep the lens on him without protecting his own safety necessarily. So there are moments in that parachute drop that are very scary. The audience senses it because it was scary. There's a moment where the silk wraps around it was our stunt double in that shot, I don't mind saying, but it was scripted to be a breakaway silk, so it's not in real danger. But the velocity, the wind velocity, has him really stuck. So watch for the shot where Arnold's character is trying to pull off the chute. It wasn't easy. It was a real struggle, really falling for that stunt performer.
Amazing. And you mentioned The Mask before, and given the success comic book movies have had in the years since that came out, it was a bit of a trailblazer, I think, in that respect. Are you surprised it hasn't been revisited and that character hasn't been brought back at any point?
There's always talk about it. There was a sequel. Don't forget, there was
Yeah.
Son of the Mask, which I avoided. They were nice enough to offer directing to me, but there was comedy is harder than action and the Mask has comedy and action, but it was primarily a comedy. Um, the comedy engine in these films has to be working perfectly because we can make a thriller more suspenseful. We can make an action movie bigger and broader, but comedy is tough. It's true. So uh, a sequel to The Mask is always something I'm asked about. It'd be lovely to return, but for me, with Jim in particular, it would be lovely to return. But we'll see. There's not. I don't like to talk about it because then I'm quoted, but it's not ready yet. But that's a lovely idea.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And back to this film, I'd love to know, how do you view this film's place, in the way those action blockbusters really evolved, and what do you hope that maybe young filmmakers might take from it? I know you alluded to that if you're doing a film class talking about the storyboards, but how do you view that in that respect?
Uh, I don't assume to teach uh, something with. Look, I'm proud of the film, so it's a great example of an action movie. I would probably encourage new filmmakers not to go too far with the AI. There's a
Yeah.
great way. We call it hybrid filmmaking. We're actually doing tests on it right now, where we're using our real actors and real stunt fighters, and using AI to enhance environments. So movies that would have probably been too expensive to make without a really big star now become more doable for even for young filmmakers. So I would just say, remember the heart of a movie is a physical performance. The chemistry between two human beings can never be replaced. But AI is a fantastic tool. It's more than a tool. It's a great storytelling device that may inspire you to tell a certain story. But try to balance. If you want to scare your audience or create suspense, try to keep as much physical action in a film as you can.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant advice. And you mentioned before they've done a great job with this 4K remaster. I know using the original camera negatives, but this set is also coming out as a steel book, which that must be exciting for you as well to see it come out in the way it is and to be celebrated.
I'm honored. It's something I made 30 years ago. And
Yeah.
for me, this is like there's a few of my movies that they call it evergreen, and I'm delighted. I think it's because I put a lot of heart in these movies as much as I can. And while it's sort of trendy to be more and more cynical in film, I like creating situations that are terrifying or suspenseful. But I believe every man, every woman in all of us can rise to be a hero. So that tends to pop up in my films. I believe in the individual, and particularly in the struggle for the love of another or protecting another. And that's really what I did with Arnold and Eraser. It's a character specifically as a protector, and Vanessa Williams is a strong woman who can also take care of herself and may not cooperate with him. I thought was a fun dynamic.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great film and a really beautiful set that I cannot wait for people to get their hands on. So, Chuck, thank you so much for your time. I'm a big
Thank
fan
you.
of your work, and it's been such a pleasure.
Been fun. Thank you for having me.
Have a great day. Thanks so much.